Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Brunilda. I'm a professor in conflict dynamics and governance at the University of Amsterdam, and I'm also chair of the European Forum for Restorative Justice, an organization that works extensively around the transformation of criminal justice systems, mainly in Europe. I'm also here today as someone who has written on, has researched the role of the art and the artists on justice. Finally, I also collaborate extensively with artists in my research practice and learn a lot from them. So it is absolutely my pleasure, therefore, tonight to moderate this conversation with two incredible justice-impacted artists, Jesse Krimes and Steve Happi, whom I will introduce in a minute. Perhaps the term justice impacted artist speaks for itself, but I'd like to add a few points for those who might not be familiar with it. Essentially, justice impacted artists are individuals who have been directly or indirectly affected by the criminal justice system. Why use the term justice impacted instead of terms like forwardly incarcerated? Well, first of all, the term justice impacted centers and humanizes the person instead of reducing them to a past conviction or incarceration. It also intentionally avoids labels, which are stigmatizing. It broadens the scope of impact, as not everyone who is harmed by the justice system has actually been incarcerated. And using justice impacted also reflects a shift towards seeing the criminal justice as something that often harms rather than delivers justice. Even though there are substantial differences between the prison systems in the countries of our artists, so Cameroon and US, including in our own country, Belgium, the prison system in every society is designed to dehumanize and isolate, stripping people of their identities and separating them from their families, communities, and societies. It harms, therefore, relations, discourages self-expression, but also political discourse, organizational critique, and creates and reinforces stigma. Artistic practice and initiatives created by justice impacted artists often, therefore, address directly these harms, exploring themes of freedom, identity, and resistance. Their perspectives are, moreover, critical in reimagining justice and challenging dominant narratives about crime and punishment. At the same time, the role of justice-impacted artists often differs from that of other artists in that it is deeply intertwined with emotional, spiritual, and often literal survival and resistance, and with building of artistic practice, but also relationality under conditions of extreme constraints and scarcity. The incarcerated artists support each other through dialogue, mentorship, political education, and sharing of resources and ideas. So these are some of the topics we will address today in this conversation with our artists, Jesse Krimes and Steve Happi. Jesse Krimes is a multimedia artist whose work explores societal mechanisms of power and control with a focus on criminal and racial justice. While locked up for 6 years in a federal prison, Jesse secretly created monumental works of art, including an astonishing 40-foot mural made with prison bed sheets, hair gel, and newspapers, and I'm sure we'll hear about it in a while. Since 2022, he is also the founder and director of the Center for Arts and Advocacy, the first national organization dedicated to supporting justice-impacted creatives. Jesse won an Emmy Award for his documentary Art and Crimes by Crimes. His work has been exhibited at multiple art museums, and he has received several prestigious fellowships from various art foundations. And welcome, Jesse. Steve Happi is a music producer, sound engineer, and activist based in Cameroon. He is a co-founder of Jail Time Records, a non-profit music label established inside the central prison of Douala, where he was in detention for a year and a half. Jail Time Records is the first recording studio inside an African prison producing the music of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated artists. So Jail Time Records and Steve's work has been featured in many, many articles internationally, I'm not going to mention that all. Welcome to both of you. I think to start with, we're going to start by introduction of yourself and your work. You start with you. Well, the presentation was already there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's an absolute honor to be here with everyone. I'm really excited to learn from everyone else as a part of this symposium. So super eager to be here and to really kind of gather with everyone in this space. I think I should probably start by saying, since the age of 13, I've pretty much transitioned through nearly every facet of the criminal justice system in the United States. So I've transitioned through juveniles probation, like jail, to state and federal prison. And so I had a very particular view of all of these different systems of punishment within the states. And the one thing that kind of really stood out to me during that time was not at a single point did one person ever ask me what was going on, what was wrong, and who I wanted to become or who I aspired to be. Everything was viewed through the lens of like punitive ideology. And so at every turn, I was met with police imperatives. And I say that because then when I was eventually arrested on my federal sentence where I served 6 years, they basically wanted me to cooperate and tell on other people. And when I refused to do that, they transferred me and put me in solitary confinement for a year. They increased my drug weights from 140 grams to 50 kilos. These are drugs that never existed. And this is a very common practice in the States. And so when I was in solitary confinement, I began to ask myself those questions. And I've realized very quickly that they could take me from my home, my family, they could take my clothes, pretty much every societal marker that forms your identity. But I realized that the one thing they couldn't take from me was my ability to create. And so I made a very conscious decision early on that I was going to spend every minute, every hour of every single day, whether I got a 5-year sentence or a life sentence, that I was going to produce something positive and use it to create artwork. And so in solitary, I began transferring mugshots of people in the newspaper onto the surface of prison to shoot soap. And for me, this did multiple different things in that the mugshots are often depicting someone at a singular point in time from a singular lens. And when you do that repeatedly over time in the media, that actually ends up forming our value systems of who you see as disposable versus who you see as valuable. And so by removing those mugshots from the newspaper and transferring them onto the surface of the soap, I was able to kind of recontextualize those narratives. And it almost served as an archive of sorts. And I worked on that piece for the entirety of the year while I was in solitary. I think we can go to the next slide. And I had to figure out a way to get them out of the prison. And so I started to collect used prison playing cards. And I took a AAA battery, busted it open from underneath the bunk of my cell. And I used that as like a little cutting device. And I cut through thousands of playing cards to create these little containers that I would glue together with toothpaste that was like serve to kind of protect the soap, but also become an integral part of the piece itself. And so I smuggled that out of the system 2 by 2 over a period of a year. And then in total, I ended up with 292 of these soap portraits and prison playing card pieces. And this was all a way to kind of, again, capture the humanity and essence of people who are incarcerated. A lot of the people who ended up on the soap, I was actually serving time with because these were from the local paper. I also very intentionally started to include transfers of politicians and celebrities as a way to kind of complicate this notion of who we view as an offender. And so that was the piece that I made in solitary. And then fast forward a little bit, I ended up fighting my drug charges, and we argued the drug weights, and I was eventually found guilty of 500 grams and not 50 kilos. And so instead of a mandatory minimum of 10 years to life, I ended up getting a 6-year sentence. They then transferred me to a maximum secure duty federal penitentiary. And it was there that I had access to slightly more materials. And so while there, I started transferring images from the New York Times using hair toe and a plastic spoon onto the surface of prison bed sheets. And this was like a very kind of laborious process. It took a long time to do these image transfers. And over a period of 3 years, I did this onto the prison bed sheets. And so the final piece ended up being 15 feet tall, 40 feet long, and made out of 39 bed sheets. And the other thing about this is that I never actually got to see this work completed or compiled together until I came home, because this would have been considered contraband, because I'm taking prison property, I'm defacing it and destroying it. And so they would have confiscated it and put me back in solitary confinement. And so I knew as soon as I completed what panel, I needed to send it out. And so it was just this way to try to kind of keep a running image of it in my head to see how it would line up. I actually used the conditions of the prison itself as a way to create the horizon line. And the other important part about this is the prison bed sheets themselves, the material, much like the soap. So for me, the soap was prison issued soap, and that captured ideas of repentance and cleansing and the kind of supposed nature of what the carceral system is supposed to be designed to do. We know it doesn't do that. But the soap conveyed that language. In the same way, the prison bed sheets were produced in these massive factories in the United States and in the prison using incarcerated labor. And they produce everything from prison bed sheets to apparel from military and Kevlar vests and solar panels. So these are huge, confined, massive workforces behind walls. And so when you think about slavery ending, it just transformed and was placed behind walls. It's the same thing that's like happening. It's the same thing happening today that's been happening. And so by transferring images on those sheets, I was able to kind of have this conversation about this hidden workforce and the power of art to be out into the world to have this conversation on my behalf in case I never made it home. Because there's a million things that could have happened in there that could have landed me a life sentence, or I could have ended up dead. And so artwork became this kind of surrogate body of sorts where I was smuggling myself out of the prison to capture all of these kind of images and things going on in the world while I was removed from it. And I'll talk very briefly about this. So this piece is Naxos. All three of these works are currently on display at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So if any of you are in New York before July 13th, please visit. But Naxos is a project where it was my 10-year anniversary of coming home. I had made Purgatory and Apocalyptine inside. Purgatory is mainly focused on kind of revealing the dignity of people who are incarcerated. Apocalyptine is mainly about capturing the systems out in society and all of the ways that they feed into mass incarceration. And so for my 10-year anniversary, I wanted to figure out how to create a project that reached back inside of prison and really focused on the dignity of the people and the scale of mass incarceration. And so I asked people who are currently incarcerated to each collect the ideal pebble. And it comes from a Carl Jung quote, which basically says you can go out into a riverbed, collect all of the pebbles, weigh them, and find the average weight, and that you may never actually find a pebble that weighs that weight. And so for me, it captured this idea of the uniqueness of an individual who's trapped in the system. And so I collected over 10,000 pebbles for people over a period of 5 years, hand wrapped all of them to thread, and then suspended them from the wall with needles. And yeah. And then, sorry, I'm just checking my slides so I know where I am. And so, yeah, I can talk about this later.
Thank you so much. We go to Steve now. The question I would have is because we also have the video. Would I prefer to introduce yourself first and then show the video, or how would you like to do it?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I would like to thank first God and Afield and Canal that you give me the opportunity because I'm representing a world community to Cameroon. Yeah, Burkina Faso. Yeah, I'm a co-founder of J-Tam Records. I would like to start by saying I didn't choose to do this project. The project chose me because in 2018, after the death of my father, I've been incarcerated wrongly because of the family dispute with the family of my dad. It was a problem, heritage, tradition. So I found myself in this narrow place called Central Prison of Douala, a place built for hundreds of people, and it's a place where you found more than 7,000 of people. Yeah, of the beginning of my incarceration, already being like a music producer and sound engineer, and I decide more. I'm kind of an optimistic person. Yeah, everything that happened in my life, I always take the positive side, and I was super curious. For me, being in prison at that time was like a privilege. Well, enough, that's how I see it. I saw it back in days. So I was more curious about like knowing people, what brought them there, recording little stories, getting interviews. And at that time was a woman from Italy, and she was working under an NGO in Cameroon for a couple months. And she was building this recording studio inside the prison. I heard about it, but I wasn't interested about like hanging out with people doing music anymore. I was more interested about like the personal story of the guy found in prison, what brought them in there. And I have this friend of mine, he's street dude of the of Douala, and he knew I was a music producer, sound engineer. He told me, "Do you know like the young lady, the Italian young lady coming to prison?" Because at the time she was working with the juvenile section of the prison. She was teaching paintings, and he told me like she's building a recording studio. I think it's a good thing. You don't have to give up. You have to meet her and like being part of the project. And the same afternoon, she arrived and he went to my cell, knocked on my door, called me. That's how I met this angel sent by God journey. And that's how like we didn't talk that much that day. She already built a recording studio, but funny enough, there was no one to work in the studio. And the reason why she built a studio because crossing to go to the juvenile section, you have to cross the main section of the prison. And there was always those guys in the middle of the court gathering, doing freestyle. And she was really shocked how talented those guys are. And she has the brilliant idea of building the recording studio. And she suggested the project to the NGO she was working at the time. And Cameroon is super musical country, and simply the prison administration accept the project of building the recording studio. And that's how I met Johnny, and we didn't spoke that much that day. And she was leaving the day after to back to Italy. It was the end of the, we call it like the civilist year in French is civilist. And she went back and we stayed in contact. Luckily enough, we had cell phones in prison, so. And I have to admit, like the first time I entered the studio that day was really the beginning of my freedom of the process. Like it was the beginning of my freedom. We've been working, gathering with the guys, exchanging, building tracks, like sculpting talent, going inside prison. Already knew a lot of artists because I was all over the prison with my phone collecting story. So I already knew a couple good singers. So, and we started creating like hands on hands this project, 40 days, 40 nights in the studio. It was really the end of our prison was another new dimension. Now it was more like a spiritual retreat, and the studio was more our space, like where we can gather, reflect, exchange, communicate, grow together, and free our soul. Yeah, express. And then after 3 months, I sent her couple songs daily, weekly. I was sending songs, and that was the biggest motivation. That's why she went back up months to Cameroon to continue the project. Then they hadn't show with us, and I'm finding myself now here, Brussels, and show the story to you. So
Thank you so much for sharing the story. So my question is, should we send a video of Steve right now, or we can wait one? Yes? Okay.
You don't matter what you say, that think what you see. What's so long for so
Thank you so much to both of you. I think you already answered one of my questions, which was how does your creative work reflect or respond to systems, in fact, that dehumanize, devalue, isolate, and stigmatize that you created from some of the stories that you mentioned. So I'd like to move into the theme of artistic responsibility and solidarity. Your work goes beyond personal liberation, acting as a lifetime for others. Could you speak to the role of peer education and mentorship within prison, and also tell us about the initiatives, tell us a little bit more about the initiatives you founded, so the Center for Arts and Advocacy and the J-Time Record. So what motivated you to do this work? You can start with Steve.
So I think, kind of like Steve, when I was inside, I kept coming across so much ingenuity. I mean, people were brilliant in their creative process, what they were making, how they were thinking, from poetry to writing music to, I mean, literally every creative discipline. And so, and like, it's a real community in there. Like, as an artist inside of prison, you're a highly respected member of that community because you're one of the few people who can actually provide something tangible or like emotionally resonant that they can send to their loved ones on the outside. And so it's very different out here where like you can be a starving artist struggling and find it really hard, but in there you're really taken care of. People really value you in a very significant way. And then when I came home, I often got invited to show my work, and I was usually the only directly impacted artist in an exhibition. And I'm a white guy from rural Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I am not like reflective of what mass incarceration is. And so I knew that there was a lot of other people that should be included in these exhibitions from my experience going through the carceral system. And so I just, during a talk, someone asked me a question, something similar to this. And I responded as such, and afterwards a funder came up to me and was like, hey, I'd really like to explore that idea and how we can maybe fund some of these other artists who you know. And that was the founding of the Right of Return Fellowship, which started in 2016. We've funded over 42 artists to date, and we are often the very first funder of these artists. And many of them have gone on to get MacArthur Genius Awards, Pulitzer Prizes, Guggenheims, solo exhibitions at previous prestigious institutions. And so it's the level of talent and creativity that exists, but like is not connected or was not connected to anything to really help remove the barriers for people who have spent literal decades behind bars. And so in 2022, we transitioned from the Right of Return Fellowship into the Center for Art and Advocacy, which is basically a multi-pronged approach to support artists pretty much at every stage of their career. And so we are building an academy program and a curriculum where we're going to partner with museums and other cultural institutions across the country. That's how we're really going to scale the work so they can work in proximity to their communities. And then we're building a residency program in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is like free time and space. Again, if you think about the artists that we're supporting and what we listen very closely to the artists, the feedback that they give us, what they need, how we can support better. And a lot of them really want to explore new materials and new medias. Because again, like one of our artists, Gary Tyler, did 42 years off death row, wrongfully incarcerated in Angola prison in Louisiana. And while he was there, he was working on quilts and he worked in the hospice program and he also produced plays, but there were a lot of other things that he's was very interested in. And so this idea of a residency is really important because it will create time and space for them to explore their materials, but we're also bringing in advocates, leading advocates from around the country. So it's also a social gathering space. And that's how we're kind of breaking down the silos of advocacy organizations, which often focus on statistics and numbers and information and getting that out to the world, with artists who can actually convey the empathy on the emotional resonance of what those statistics are and the faces and people behind those numbers. And so that's the residency. We're going to continue the fellowship. And we just opened our first brick and mortar space in Brooklyn, New York, had our first inaugural exhibition where we featured 35 of our artists. And it's just been incredibly transformative. But through every part of the Center for Art and Advocacy, we are artists first, and then how do we remove the barriers and all of the things that we need to do to create opportunities and systems for them to really thrive.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the big motivation is, first of all, they're super talented, as Jesse was saying, and please come say education.
Christ, it's actually, it has to do with the solidarity between incarcerated parties, let's say, and this idea of kind of giving back to them in a way, which actually what I'm hearing is more the idea of artists first and appreciation of color, the energy you talk about. So it's just more what motivated you to do the jail, the organization that you founded, and say something more about it.
Yeah, the motivations, the talent, the amount of talent you found there, and I'm saving my eyes too because I know I went through a lot. It was a 20 years reposition for my case, so we was really going to fit it in, like, because when we incarcerated, it's you against the time. So I was trying to escape it, like, so I was really motivated. Finding the recording studio, as I said, was our space, was our freedom, no? So and especially being lucky and being released of prison, getting addicted to that. And mostly before being in prison, music for me, it was my passion, but it was more about like the cool side of it. It was more about like you want to just these big artists, you want to earn a lot of money, and then my incarceration just changed my perception of music and my relation with art in general. Now I'm saying, like, I discover music and art as this powerful instrument of communication, change. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask a question which might be a little bit difficult. I'm not sure of this, but When I think of rehabilitative arts programs, so that they hold this category, they are usually framed within sort of carceral logics, right? And they are mostly focusing on personal transformation rather than systemic change. So I'm wondering, how do you see your own practice, creative practice, and your support to other incarcerated artists in relation to these more state-mandated programs? Um, there is something you have also benefited from them, from the stories that you've told. You have been part of them, perhaps. So just how is your relation with such programs, and how is your work different from such cohorts?
So I think that, at least in the States, there are very few programs that actually exist within the carceral system. And I guess I should say this, like the States, we have over 2 million people who are currently incarcerated, and an additional 7 million people who are under some kind of supervision. So this is like a massive system across all of the states. And like out of that, I think there are kind of two states that do better than most, and that's New York City and California. Outside of that, the programs just don't really exist. There's like a room that you may be able to go into, but there are no real facilitators. There's no anything. It's just a space that you can create. And so the people who end up using that, creating and facilitating those things, are the people on the inside. And I say that again because it's also like, I think rather than creating work within a system that's like designed as therapy, or that there are programs like that on the outside that use art as therapy, but it was really important to me to think about how to treat artists as artists, right? Like, not as people who have issues that they need to work through. It can be therapeutic. I'm not saying it can't be. I just think like there also should be another avenue for people who are this creative, this talented, like their voices should be heard. And so the way that I approach that is like, I'm not going to wait for permission or for people to change the programs that they're doing. I'm going to build something that doesn't exist. And that is what the center is. And so that's kind of how I approached like collaborating with people on the inside, either in my independent practice, which then becomes kind of like a feeding system into the fellowship when people come home. And so it's just like creating liberatory practices that focus on who people aspire to be and who they want to become. And once we ask those questions, then we try to remove, again, all of the barriers that stand in my way. And it's less about, just working within that punitive kind of thing that already exists.
Thank you.
Especially here in Cameroon, there is no rehabilitation program when you talk about prisons, only punitive. But luckily, we have the prison administration is super open and to make their work light. So they partner with private organization, NGOs, and we are the ones doing the rehabilitation program inside prison, mostly all over the country. So they're super open to this idea. It make the work lighter. Also, there is no support at all or information. And yeah, that's the reality in Cameroon. So we manage, you have like private organization running, being part of the prison system, as a big role in the prison system.
Okay. Thank you. So I have one last question, and then I'll open the floor to the audience, perhaps, or with their questions. I don't know if you see it like this, but it looks to me like this. So justice impacted taxes often become bridges. You can even call it a burden, perhaps. Bridges to those outside the system. So I wonder, how does your work communicate beyond the prison walls, and what do you hope people who do not have that experience of incarceration take away from it?
I think the most important thing for me is that it's twofold, really. It's that, one, people actually recognize the scale of the issue that we're talking about and actually understand incarceration not as a single issue. Like incarceration is the epicenter where all social crises converge. And I think that's really important because a lot of our artists are working on issues of women's rights and race and immigration, like literally everything that exists in the world is filtered and punished through the carceral system. And so I think it's not a single issue, it's a microcosm of society. And then I think the second part is to understand that while this scale exists, that we are talking about individual people, human beings, which I think often get lost when you talk about 2 million people or you start saying numbers. It's like, how do you actually create something in the world that people can enter into and form an emotional connection and resonate with, that it actually moves them, that it connects with them on an intimate kind of level? Because I think that's where you actually get people to truly care. And I think that's what I hope my work does. And that's also what I hope my work through the center does, just by creating space for other artists out in the world to be doing that. And so I think the more successful we can make our artists, the more successful we will be in connecting with other people. Ultimately, the goal is to end mass incarceration.
Camps.
We did communications was the center of what we do through music, visual arts, and fine of is super. We are processing a lot of success. Yeah, we to the even the formerly incarcerated artists, you can we have a successful concert outside prison where they've been released. We have a couple of them who are become like stars in Africa and in Cameroon. And yeah, so people are really responding well. Right now we are preparing it all with the former incarcerated artists of Douala, Burkina Faso. We are preparing it all in Toronto, Berlin. So internationally and locally, people are really responding well. So it's pleasant and it's really therapeutic too for them. Like, yeah, it's a matter of when you've been through incarceration, you always have this sentiment, like this feeling of being rejected by the society. And that's how you started, like your adventure in store. Like you are against the world. Now they feel in part of the world, they are appreciated by the world. There are good people like round of applause in concert. You have big best ambassador like French, Italian, UK. They're really well known. Like now the prison of Douala is this center where everyone wants to go and see what's really happening. It's a sightseeing. We don't have enough in Cameroon, but it's one of the best now. So recently I was with the UK ambassador of Cameroon. He's been playing with the guys 2 weeks ago in prison. He's a musician too. He wants to have this experiment. He has a tour with them, play with them. He posted it on his and I don't know, Instagram, something like that. So now they feel more consideration, and this really, we are not creating champion, they're already champion. We are just boosting the confidence through the program and what we are doing. And it's a beautiful thing that we try, and it's just starting. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much to both of you. I think this last comment really also confirms a little bit this distinction between when others do things for prisoners in this more kind of rehabilitative way, and what you are doing, which is really uplifting the talent, uplifting the voices, so they can tell their own stories, and you keep the quality really high. I think the quality of each of you and of your artists that you promote is amazing. So I think that becomes very clear from the words. I will open now the floor to the audience. I don't know how many minutes we have. We have 10, 15, 10? Okay. Is there any question or comment that you'd like to ask our artists here? You can raise your hand and then I think somebody can bring the... Yes, I see a hand. solved it.
Thank you so much for sharing the stories and the work that you've had, the work that you're doing. I'm Rosa, I'm from Impact. We work on arts, culture, and conflict transformation. And I had a question for Jesse. It's the title of your centre. It's the Centre for Arts and Advocacy. We're struggling to get to that place of advocacy because we're so focused on supporting artists and cultural organizations, building networks and spaces for voices and stories to come out. And I just wondered how your journey has been from the fellowship program to becoming a center to advocate, and how you can use the stories and the experiences and the work that you've been doing for that purpose of advocacy, what it means to you, and how you can maximize the space that you have and the connections you have to impact on an advocacy point of view. Thanks.
It's a great question, and I think it's twofold, really, where investing in artists and doing whatever you can to help the artists that you're supporting be as visible and supported out in the world is advocacy for me. Because again, it's like my artwork, when I came home, got attention, and now I get to sit and speak to people and travel. And so when you do that for other artists, they also start to thrive and they start to build community and they start to be out in the world and tell their stories and talk about their artwork. And so I think that's like a primary way that we support advocacy is through the artists themselves. And then the secondary way that we think about it is like, we do specific outreach to advocacy organizations as guided by the artists that we work with. And so Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter she was shackled while she was incarcerated and forced to give birth while shackled. And so that was like that was her like main issue that she was really trying to leverage her creative practice around to talk about. And so, but she wanted to change the policy because it still existed. And so we were able to reach out to advocacy organizations and partner with Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker. And they eventually passed a law in Connecticut that ended the chaperone of women while they were giving birth. And, it's just listening to the artists, what issue areas they're working on, and then going back to the team and being like, okay, who do we know? How do we leverage our network and make the connections? Because usually once you make the connection, like, people are going to create and do what they need to do.
Okay. Steve, would you like to add anything to that, or we can take one more question?
The question?
Yeah, only if you'd like to, otherwise. Yeah.
Any other? Yes.
Thank you very much for your testimony, both of you. Obviously, you are survivors in this course, and thank you for this picture. We really show what is the United States based on the prison system and stuff. My question is more or less for Jesse, because I'm sure we know that in US most of people in prison are life. There's a lot of future artists, rapper, future, people who do arts, Basquiat. There's a lot of Basquiat people, but some people just like you who were on the nice or wrong place, just like you. But when you're black, you can be on death row when you are possession of cocaine. And if you are in death row, you don't have the mental health to do art. You did, and you get out. So I want to question you, because of course in US, I love it black people ask you this question. Or you deal the question of privilege. And, because as you know, you don't have time. And both you deal with brothers and sisters basically in, because it's not the things to get out, but it's a thug life, like Tupac Shakur say. The prison is still in you. How you deal with this question, especially in this group?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I saw that entering into the system, when I got judged and I got my 5-year sentence, the judge literally said to me, he's like, I'm going to take a chance on you. I see value in you. He's like, I'm just going to let you know that just earlier today, someone came before me who had the exact same criminal offense, the exact same criminal history, and I just gave him 22 years. Wow. And he gave me the largest variance that the court has ever handed out. He departed downward. Again, I didn't cooperate. I didn't tell people. And he still went below my guideline range because he saw value. And the other guy was black. And so as soon as I entered the system, I've seen it at every turn. And so I think the way that I try to process that and deal with that is okay, the world's fucked up. But if the world's fucked up and I'm getting privilege, how do I actually leverage my privilege? And so that's why every space I go into, every opportunity I get, I crack the door open and I keep it open. And so even when I did my show at the Met, I said, you have to partner with the center. You got to work with some of our artists. And the Met is a behemoth of an institution, and they were receptive. And it's because I'm using that access, I'm using those tools to keep it open for other people who then come in and are getting the same opportunities as that. And so that's the weight and responsibility that I feel is as a person, as a human, having gone through that system and seen it. But the other thing too, I would push back a little bit is Gary Tyler, who did 42 years, again, on death row, wrongfully incarcerated since the age of 16. He produced, the man is brilliant. He created phenomenal quilts. He produced a play inside a prison, and he got the guards or the institution to let him bring in women from another prison to participate in the play. The play gets covered in the New York Times, and it's performed all over the place and covered all over the place. And I'm just I think there's just so much power and potential that people have given the opportunity and access. And so when I get opportunities and access out here, again, all I have to do is keep the door open and it works itself out.
Thank you. Okay, so we round it up. Yeah, one last Virgil? No? Okay. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you to our audience also for participating and for your attention. So I think now I'm inviting people to drinks.
Exactly, that's it.
Okay.
We just meet downstairs to celebrate the time.
A big applause for